We are continuing to monitor the breaking news in the United Healthcare CEO shooting investigation. But right now, I want to talk about the nation's response to this murder, which took place in broad daylight on a street in New York City, because something a bit unexpected has happened following the murder. A reaction not of universal horror, that a 50-year-old father of two and husband was shot dead in public, but rather of, and I don't want to call it glee, but let's just say not unhappiness, especially online, where the internet sleuths who often dedicate themselves to tracking down people accused of racist behavior in public places, criminals, including January 6 fugitives, and more, have been actively refusing to help. Donald Trump Jr., son of our incoming ruler, went on his ex-Twitter page and did the patented "Internet do your thing" post. And the reaction was mostly, yeah, no. Other popular conservatives like Ben Shapiro and anti-woman zealot Matt Walsh saw their mentions go up in flames when they tried to attack quote-unquote evil liberals for celebrating the murder of a CEO, with some of their supporters replying that they had gotten it wrong. Indeed, instead of universal condemnation, what we have seen, and many of us have heard both on and offline, has been a barrage of stories of Americans' awful experiences with insurance companies. Stories of claims denied, of people who've gotten sicker or even died because insurance companies like United refuse to pay claims. Let's just be clear, there's a real hatred for these companies that is unfurling on social media right now, and also in real life, too. At the time he was killed, the victim, Brian Thompson, was CEO of the largest private insurer in the U.S. As CEO, he was embroiled in a lawsuit over consolidation. United has gobbled up dozens of smaller insurance companies over the decades to become not just the largest insurer in the U.S., but by profits, the largest insurer in the world. And they exist in an industry that is all about consolidation and profit, where basically 4 or 5 companies control everything and care little about healthcare consumers in the minds of many Americans. The conversation around healthcare policies, corporate practices, and economic frustrations, it goes across partisan lines, and it's practically engulfed the entire actual story of a man shot dead outside a New York City hotel. This is not a good time for the health insurance industry, so much so that other health insurance companies like CVS Health and Blue Cross Blue Shield have reportedly removed executive bios from their websites. But I've got to say that it is strange to watch an almost united public, left and right, use this tragedy to go off on big business and cold-hearted insurance companies, when a majority of Americans just elected a billionaire backed by the world's richest billionaire, who he's now appointed along with a near billionaire to run the country and slash the budget, plus a cabinet full of a half a dozen other billionaires whose collective goal is to slash spending on everything the government does for ordinary Americans and cut taxes on billionaires and big businesses, aka themselves. Now, if there is one thing that the left and the right can agree on, it's that this system in America does not work for regular people. But there are so many contradictions when it comes to what Americans want to actually do about it. For example, Americans frequently say they want their government to be run like a business. It's one of the most common things that you hear on the campaign trail. And at least nominally, if you ask people who voted for Trump why they did it, they will say it's because he's a businessman, or that they had more money when he was president. And they think that he will help the economy and make eggs and other things cost less. And apparently some of them like it when a presidential candidate fake fillets a microphone, or when his running mate calls women who haven't given birth to children, including the sitting vice president, worthless trash. But I digress. Apparently about 76 million Americans have forgotten that when Trump was president the first time, he made things cost more because he mishandled the COVID pandemic. And that his first and only legislative success was passing a tax cut in 2017 that ballooned the deficit and increased inflation, aka making things cost more. And that even without the pandemic, things would have wound up costing more because of the tax cut that overwhelmingly went to big businesses and the super rich. Not to mention the fact that the policies Trump voters heavily favor, mass deportation, tariffs, will also make everything cost more and likely create an economic disaster for the U.S. His Project 2025 plans would reduce freedom and increase government control over everything from education to women's bodies. And his plans to personalize the federal government by stacking it with ultra-loyalists would do literally nothing to make the economy better. but it would make a small group of his friends and himself a whole lot richer without helping anybody else. And perhaps most ironic is that what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are proposing to do in cutting everything from veterans benefits to health care to Social Security and Medicare is how you run a country like a business. Because businesses, despite the Supreme Court saying they are people who only care about profits. And helping veterans and old people and kids and generally, helping regular people is generally not profitable. Businesses do not care if you are happy or healthy or free. What they care about is that their owners, namely their shareholders, their CEO and the bosses, make more and more profits. Businesses will raise prices or lay people off without mercy if doing so will create more profit. It's not personal. Whereas government could not be more personal. So real talk. If you're mad at United Healthcare and you voted for Trump, you essentially voted for America to be run like United Healthcare. It's the ultimate irony. But that is America. Joining me now is the person I wanted to talk to about this today, Thom Hartmann, host of the Thom Hartmann program on SiriusXM and author of The Hidden History of the American Dream. And Thom, when I was thinking about this and trying to write about this and sort of ruminating on this United Healthcare thing, I literally had you in mind because I think you probably can tell that I was a frequent listener to the Thom Hartmann radio show when you just heard that open. Because it is so ironic to me that people left and right are mad at United Healthcare, but they voted to make America be run like United Healthcare. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's totally nuts, Joy. You're absolutely right. Corporations are, if corporations actually were people, they would be psychopaths. They have no conscience. They have no consideration for other people's feelings. In fact, they don't even have the ability to feel other people's feelings, and that's how they're designed. America has a very strange relationship. The whole politics of this, going back to Reagan, oh, yes, we need to run government like a business and be more efficient and all this. I mean, efficiency is a fine thing, but running government like a business, businesses are run for profit. Government is run for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's run for the benefit of the people. Generally, that's intangible. It's really difficult to measure those things, many of those things. I mean, so the FBI stopped 8 terrorist attacks. Well, how do you measure that? People don't even know it happened. Right. How do you? So it just makes no sense. And in particular, with healthcare, the history of the American healthcare system is absolutely shocking. We are the only country in the developed world that doesn't recognize healthcare as a right, as a human right, and doesn't cover every single person in the country. 25 million people in America have no health insurance whatsoever, and roughly half of us are radically underinsured. And that just is something that no other country would tolerate. And it goes back to a fellow named Frederick Hoffman in the 1890s, and it's an amazing story. I don't know if you want to get into it, but it basically starts with the story of this guy coming over from Germany. Well, if I could just run into it a little bit.
Very quickly, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, sure. In 1887, Germany got the world's first single-payer healthcare system. Hoffman came over to the United States and got a gig as vice president of the Prudential Insurance Company. And in 1896, he published a book called Race, Traits, and Tendencies of the American Negro. And his argument was that black people were genetically inferior, and therefore, if we simply denied them health care, eventually, within a few generations, all black people would die out, and this would solve the race problem in America. His book was one of the best-selling books in America from 1896 to around 1930. He testified before Congress dozens of times. He testified before all kinds of states. Prudential put him on a nationwide tour. He was the reason why Harry Truman's effort at single-payer health care was shot down. He was the reason why FDR's effort at single-payer health care was shot down. And he was long dead in 1965 when Medicare came along, but his teachings were actually cited as one of the reasons why there's a 20% hole in Medicare, so that poor people, read that in the South as poor black people, would show up at the hospital and wouldn't thus integrate the doctor's office. I mean, that's how we got a privatized healthcare system rather than essentially a socialized healthcare system like everybody else has, where the government makes sure that everybody is covered. It's just an insane story. I wrote a book about the hidden history of American healthcare, and I was just astonished when I learned this backstory.
You know, that is amazing. This is why we booked Thom Hartmann, because that is an important history. And if you go all the way back, it is big medicine that opposed having Medicare at all. They've always opposed it, right? They've opposed the idea of single payer and of public health care the long time. But also you've had Americans on the right really sort of trained to also be against things like Obamacare until they get it, to want to repeal it because ideologically they think it's communism or socialism, to want to get rid of it. But at the same time, they too are suffering from a lack of access. In red states, they're still fighting to just get Obamacare unless they sort of sneak it in the way that it was done in Kentucky, or when there's a Democratic governor elected. And then as soon as there's a Republican, they go back to wanting to repeal it. How do you explain this disconnect where people have literally been primed for this sort of Tea Party opposition to getting the thing that they're then mad that they cannot get?
I think to a large extent, what we find is that if you pull back the curtain over at the GOP and on all of these right-wing think tanks and publications and whatnot, what you find is a group of billionaires who basically don't want to pay their damn taxes. And
yes,
this is a problem. And so, when Barack Obama came out with a program that was essentially the program that the Heritage Foundation had come up with, Obamacare. Mitt Romney did this in Massachusetts. It was a conservative plan.